Uh, I'm going to start this webinar now, and is about how to access funding for your church or charity, but that could be for your organization as well if you're not a registered charity. So right at the beginning, who am I? My name is Dominic Pinnock, and I have got over 30 years funding and bid writing experience. Started at the ripe old age of, I was around 17, so that would have been around 1987. So that gives you a bit of an idea of my age as well at the same time. I've secured funding over the last 30 years from a wide variety of sources. I've managed teams of bid writers, and some of the examples are Lloyds Bank Foundation, National Lottery, always a major source of funding. Many of you may have already been to Awards for All and Reaching Communities. There's MAC funding, Henry Smith Foundation, and many others. There's thousands of foundations and trusts within the UK who you can apply to. Next, about GoodtoGive. GoodtoGive, as it says here, we've worked with ministries and charities within ethnic minority churches for well over a decade, and we're the UK's #1 provider of gift aid management for churches. Myself teaming up and becoming a part of the GoodtoGive team, it just adds another string to the bow. And effectively what we do, we save clients thousands of pounds every year, and we help to increase your incomes. And just in a nutshell, it's much more, it can be much more complex than that, but we're here to make the service, the system, as smooth and easy to access as possible. So I guess one of the major things that you'll be here for is to actually find out what funding opportunities are available right now. So in terms of online, because a lot of times you can't go out and meet people, well, you can't, we're on lockdown. You've got people like GoFundMe. You can send out put together case statements, send them out to foundations and to trusts. A case statement is between 1 and 2 sides of A4 paper, and it captures your essence as an organization, what you provide, who you provide it for, what you need, and what the impact of it will be. But before you do all of that, we need to look at how you're going to become funding ready, how partnering can help you secure funding, also very important. Sometimes we're working in isolation and not getting anywhere. How to find the funding opportunities that are right for you. How to identify a project for funding. It's not everything that will be attractive to funders, no matter how passionate you are about it and how much you believe in what you're doing. How working with GoodtoGive can greatly increase your chances of securing funding. That's what we're covering today. So why your organization should consider funding? Well, the first thing, it'll enable your organization to become more financially stable and to grow. I've worked with a number of organizations who have never accessed funding. where they've found it a constant struggle. They're delivering very good services, but they're always, I guess, chasing around after to try and find new funding. And so if you can access funding, it just takes away that extra stress, and it can then enable you to help more people, because whilst you're not concentrating on the financial side of things because you've got it covered, you've got that set down, that will enable you to concentrate on the service that you're actually providing. It will enable you to contribute to the community in a greater way. That's still more or less the same thing. Enable you to reach and increase the number of people that are seeking God in this time of crisis. I'm sure that everybody out there is noticing that you can go on Facebook, you can go on Instagram, and more people are now speaking about God. More people are reaching out. And I think that that definitely identifies where that the church has got a major role to play within this time of crisis. And there's an opportunity to work with other change churches in your community, which will, I guess, it will amplify your effectiveness. It will widen the scope. You can pool resources, you can pool skills. An opportunity to bridge the divide between church and state and increase influence in the community. So that, once again, is more like partnership working. It's actually tapping into resources that are there that maybe churches ultimately have not been doing over the years, and just, I guess, strengthening the position of the church within the community, an ideal opportunity. So let's look at some of these funding opportunities now. The first thing that I always say when people approach me is, well, in terms of funding opportunities, they say, what's out there? Google search is probably the first port of call. If you put in what you want funding for into Google search, it will bring stuff up for you. Sometimes it's right off the mark, but sometimes it can actually get it spot on at the same time. The National Lottery, excuse me, is the major funding body for charities, community organisations, and a major one for churches as well. There are a number of different funding strands that come from the National Lottery. More so right now, we have got, it's around £300 million fund within the National Lottery that is going to be specifically for COVID-19 projects and services. Trusts and foundations, I mentioned those earlier. Not always the easiest to access, but when you find a trust and you build up a relationship with them, they can become a major funder who will refund you. So accessing those, that's another opportunity. The Church Urban Fund, I'm not sure if all the churches are actually aware of the Church Urban Fund, which is also behind the Windrush grants that's rolled out every year through the Home Office. At the moment, I haven't seen any specific funding that is coming through the Church Urban Fund in regards to COVID-19 projects and services, but I'm keeping my eyes peeled and watching. Then the next one would be procurement. Now, in terms of procurement, there are a number of hubs that basically, if you find a local procurement hub who you can access and register as a supplier, they will provide you with easier access to new business opportunities and contracts. You'll receive regular emails from them, and they will tell you about new contracts and opportunities that are available within the public sector, and they will match those up with your capabilities. So when you register with them, they will then have, I guess, a skills and experience record for your church, your charity, and they will try their best to match you up. Now, what usually happens is you will get hundreds, sometimes thousands of possible funding opportunities that are laid out for you. So I don't think they're very good at narrowing it down. You can tell by that, but it's then down to you to sift through. And usually, I usually find the top ones, the ones that are at the start, that they first provide you with, are usually the best ones. So if you can, but to register with them, it's that you try and have as much in place as possible, and that you've got the right structure to access funding. So you've got to look at what your structure is in terms of your policies, your procedures, your status. Look at what your levels of experience are. Know very much who your staff and your volunteers are. How many have you got? Can you put a cost to that as well, so that you know when you're pricing out your services, how much is your service really worth? Have you got good financial records, and have you got financial controls in there? A lot of funders actually want to know what financial controls have you got in place, because if they're going to give you the money, they want to know that it's safe. They want to know that it's controlled, and that they're not going to find that it's just a mess, because they're public funds at the end of the day. So at the end of the project, there's accountability. So everything has to be very clear, and paper trails, so on and so forth. Right. How to obtain funding during COVID-19 or Corona crisis. First one, remodeling. Think about how you operate right now, or how you always have operated, and the services that you've been providing. Now, how can you remodel yourself to fit in with the current makeup, the current picture that's out there now? So if you did a lot of one-to-one, face-to-face type of stuff, how can you still provide that service and still reach out to people without losing the impact, but without putting yourself at the same time in danger? So it's about looking at that, looking inwardly, and sometimes being very critical about yourselves and not being scared to change things. Be responsive. It's not that dissimilar to how a progressive organization during normal times before COVID-19 would operate. We should be delivering services and projects which are responsive to the real existing needs of service users, of congregations, of members, and so on. So really that would involve maybe doing surveys, that primary research, very important. When it comes to funding, a lot of the times, one of the main questions is, how do you show that there's a need? And it's not always good enough just to go online and a load of secondary data that you've pulled from other sources. That old saying, straight from the horse's mouth, is very, that really stands out here. Funders want to know why. How do you know? Yeah, how have your experiences led me to this right now? Getting funding ready, a great opportunity right now to look inwardly and prepare for the future. So I'm not just talking about now, I'm talking about post-COVID-19, because we are going to get through this, and when we get on the other side of COVID-19, this is the ideal opportunity right now to prepare yourself. So to look at possible partnerships, to look at the status of your organization. For example, are you a registered charity, a not-for-profit organization? Have you got a constitution? In terms of your trustees, your members, people, directors, who are they? Have they got the skills to carry you through to the next level? Those type of things. Because there's certain funding bodies where if you go to them, they need to see that in place. They need to see that you've got an annual report, that you're up to date with all your accounting, and that when they ask for something like that, it's instant. You can just get it, email it straight over to them. Forward thinking. So in other words, being proactive. We know that demand for specific projects and services is going to rocket post COVID-19. There's going to be more demands for counselling, probably especially bereavement, projects to help combat the effects of poverty. There may be people who are facing housing issues, and I'm not saying that you have to be an expert in all these fields, but when you're putting together a project, maybe think a bit beyond the project and to do a bit of research around it, so that, for instance, now if you're a project that's dealing with poverty, there will be that connection probably with housing and benefits, so to know where to make those referrals to, or to signpost people to, looking at, it could be debt support, anything like that. Consider your structure. Well, we've already type of touched on that already, and that is just we have to keep on coming back to that again and again. I've worked with a number of organizations, and especially soon as you start getting funding, and unfortunately, this thing, money, finance, it can cause problems if you don't have the right structure in place and the right people to deal with it. Yeah. And finally, consider the competition. And when you go for funding, it's very competitive, very, very competitive. And most likely if you're going for a funding pot, it's not just going to be you and one or two other charities, churches, organizations. There's probably going to be hundreds. Sometimes it could be thousands. And so the funding panels, they've got to narrow it down. So consider the competition. Do you all know what your unique selling point is? Your specialism, your expertise? How can you sell that the best? You've got to be very clear on it. Very, very clear. When it comes to funding, what should be your first steps? Well, the first steps I would say would be take a deep breath and slow down. That's the first thing I always say. Usually when clients first come to me, they've got 101 ideas. But at that point, they're just ideas, and you need to bring more than just an idea and an opinion. We need to see proper plans in place. You need to know what your aims are, what the objectives are that are going to achieve these aims. You've got to know what impact you're going to have. Where is this impact going to be? Yeah. And what are the threats? What are the risks to this project's success? And there's a lot that needs to go into it. A lot of these questions that I just put there, unfortunately, those need to come from you, because I can't always answer that. I've got a good idea because I've worked with so many charities and organizations, but directly I cannot tell you what the answer is. I can't tell you what the definite impact is. I can have a good go. And a lot of the times when people bring me a plan and they give me as much detail as possible, I can help to enhance that through my experience and help to formulate it so that it sounds more impressive to the funders. Primary and secondary research, I keep on coming back to this, but in terms of first steps, it's so important that you do your primary research. And if you can do it before you've actually engaged with us at Good2Give, even better, because that means we can hit the ground running. There's not as many questions that I have got to ask you, because and I don't have to squeeze as much, that it will flow naturally. A lot of the times, if we're having to search for reasons for this project, that suggests that the right levels of primary research have not been done, basically. Governance and structure. So governance, major. Ensure you need to have the right bank account in your church, organization, charity. Make sure that you've got enough, more than one signatory, and ultimately not related. Don't live at the same address. Ensuring that you have got bank statements, up-to-date bank statements, your accounts are up to date, and policies and procedures that could be asked for, depending on where you're working. It could be safeguarding, health and safety.
Okay, I think I'm there.
Yeah, ensure that we've got all of those in place. And you'll be surprised how many people are delivering very good projects out there, but the problem being they don't have the right governance. They don't have the right tools, in other words, to move forward, to apply for funding. So it's important that you get those in place. Positioning yourself for funding. If I was to ask you the question, do you know who you are? And surprisingly, a lot of people, as I know, I'm not talking about you as an individual, I'm talking about your organization, your church. Who are you? What do you represent? How do you work? And can it just roll off the tongue? I mentioned in the first slide about creating a case statement that can be sent out to foundations and trusts. It's important that you put together a statement of who you are. Show that you are the expert in your field. When we're passionate about something, we're apt to waffle and not get straight to the point because we are trying to sell something. What the best way to sell yourself is to be direct, is to be as concise and to narrow it down, to say things as much in a nutshell without losing impact, because you've got to look at it this way. Trusts, funds, grant giving bodies, they see thousands of applications, bids, statements every week. So it's like when you go for a job interview and you've got that person who talks so much that it's lost. It becomes lost in translation. You've got the people on the panel, their heads swimming, thinking, I'm not sure what he's on about. And I don't know if I even want this person I don't want to employ this person because they seem like they're too much. You know, you have to know your stuff. And if you know your stuff, you can narrow it down pretty quickly. And make no assumptions of knowledge. I'm hoping that within this webinar here, that I haven't really got caught or baffled anybody by using any acronyms or any specialist language, because I always say, if you're going to produce anything out there for public consumption, I produce presentations, not being rude, presentations for idiots. And that's not me being rude, it's just me really being sane. I'm just saying that it's got to be something that everybody, no matter at what level of understanding you're at, can pick it up. Because a lot of the times the people on these grant giving bodies, they're not experts in the field that you're an expert in. So they may not understand abbreviations. And if you're going to use an abbreviation, you should explain it in full early on anyway, right at the start before you even use it. So make no assumptions. And sometimes we think that we're impressing people by speaking and using language that can actually keep people out of that conversation. So what is a project? Well, one of the best ways to differentiate a project from, say, business or operations is to look at a clear start. It's got to have a clear start, a project, and a clear end. A project's delivery dates may differ, but the project will have a defined end, either because the project produces the defined product or services or deliverables, or because the project is agreed to be closed. But either way, you've got a fixed way of doing it. So to realize that even when a project comes to an end, you could also have a plan within there that what you're going to do when the project comes to an end. A lot of funders actually want to know that. So when the project comes to an end, does it come to an end, or is that work going to need to be sustained? If it is, then how are you going to sustain it? All right. A strong project, components of a strong project. A strong project, well, the first thing is that, as I said, it's timed. Everything is about timing. The application, you'll have a specific amount of time within which you need to complete the application. So if the application needs to be submitted by the 10th of January, then really, January is probably the worst date I could have actually chosen, because a lot of things close down then. So let's say February, 10th of February, you don't want to be starting this application on the 8th or the 9th of February. It doesn't make sense. You need to have enough time to write an application, a draft, to have critical friends. Now, critical friends are people maybe experienced in that area, experienced at application writing, who will look at your work and sometimes tear it to shreds and start again, and they'll make suggestions and proposals in regards to how to improve it. So it's getting the timing right, and also in terms of how you're going to deliver the project, planning that out strategically, so that you know you may have different levels, different stages within that project, and you've got to try and identify when each stage will start. Does one lead into another? Does one stop when another one starts? All those type of things. Full cost recovery. I always say to projects, when you apply for funding to organizations, when you apply for funding for projects or services, you should be going for full cost recovery. In other words, you need to get funding for everything, and that would go down to the very last thing, like a paperclip budgets. And it sounds silly, but it's true. The more that you, the less that you have to think about funding, because you've covered all your ends, the better services and projects you will provide, the better quality, because you can concentrate your efforts on the provision. Know your resources. That's including staffing and volunteers. Only you really have the best idea of what you need to deliver a project effectively, successfully. So you need to know everything inside and out. It's always good to maybe have a bit of a steering group to identify what resources are going to be required, because if it's just one person, the chances are is that you're going to forget things. And once you've put in that application, it's too late then. So the more that you can identify prior to that. And there's one thing that I haven't put in here that I want to bring up there at this point is have broad shoulders. You're going to be criticized. Not you, but what you write. You've got to have a critical approach with it. Your critical friend, as mentioned earlier, or friends, they need to be able to critique your work and pull it to bits sometimes, and don't take it personal. Yeah, because all of it is about the finished product in the end. There's been times when I have done an application within my team, and I've sent it through to one of my critical friends, and they've sent it back to me and said, "What are you on?" I'm not sure where that's come from. So it sometimes feels like a bit of a thump in the stomach, you know, but you can't take it too personal, because in the end, but I'm not saying that you just accept everything that a critical friend would say. A critical friend could tell you something, but if you're so sure about what you've put down there already, I'm not saying that you ignore the critical friend, but then that's where you must have not a debate, a discussion. Choose, work it out, and to sell your idea. Yeah. Risks and contingencies. You know, if you can identify the risks in advance, you've got a better chance of developing contingency plans. So it's about trying to find as many different problems and just brainstorm, put them out there on paper and think about, could this happen? And sometimes the things that are out there, we think that could never happen, and then they happen. If you've already at least got some type of contingency in place, you're more likely to be able to overcome the problem as quickly as possible. Research, quoting, and stakeholders. You know, I've mentioned research, and I keep on coming back to that. That primary research is so important. Know your product, know your service, know why it's needed. And you need to know that. You can't just take somebody else's research and say, this is why it's needed because they've proven this. We can use that in the application, but ultimately that doesn't say a lot about you yourself and your ability to work with your members, with your community. You need to get it from the horse's mouth yourself. Courting. Now that's not meeting a future husband or wife. Yeah, that is actually courting the funder, finding out what the building a relationship with the funder, finding out who is a go-to person, having a go-to person who you can discuss things with, who when they see your name, they'll say, ah, I know him, I know her. Yeah, we've been speaking there. They're well established. I've been quite impressed with them, those type of things. And also building up a relationship with stakeholders. Now, stakeholders, that's anybody, any organization, any business who would could be affected by the project or services that you're going to produce. So that could even be the media. The police could be within their schools, colleges, local community members, community leaders, other churches, other faiths, all sorts. You know, it's up to you to identify who the stakeholders are in regards to your project and services that you're going to be producing. People like the lottery, they like to know how have stakeholders become involved in the in the development of the project. So if you've spoken with them, you may have had consultations, carried out surveys, you may have even developed a steering group that has got stakeholders as a part of it so that they can feed into the development of the project. And then finally, partnerships. Is something that a lot of funders now, they really value that, they really look for that. Sometimes they look for it because they want to save money. Sometimes they look for it because they genuinely believe that pooling resources is the best way forward, pooling experiences so that we can have services out there that are for as wide a scope of people as possible. So strategic partnerships, a route to secure funding. So benefits of a partnership. Well, capacity to complete a project, definitely. Sometimes we do not have everything within our church, organization, charity to actually complete a project. I think it's important that we're honest with ourselves, because we all want to do good things out there, but we may not necessarily always have the experience, we may not have the structure in place. And so sometimes rather than going out there and trying to develop everything ourselves, and trying to cram everything in quickly, sometimes we might be best off actually teaming up with an organization that may have those things in place, and they may not have what you've got. So by pooling together, you become a strong force. And I think especially if we're looking within, when we're looking at churches now, a lot of times when I've seen churches, it's been, I want this for my church, I want this for my members, and then not getting that funding. Whilst, you know what, the power of bringing churches together and the sharing of that experience, I think there's so many positive aspects that can come out of that. Besides finance, I think in terms of strength as a church, growing as a force, I think that is a major way forward. Ability to apply for bigger funding pots. The more experience, the more organized, the more established that you are as an organization, the bigger pots of money you can apply for. Increased impact and benefit for service users. The more money you get, the more things you can do. It's just basic common sense, that one. You know, the more you can do, and so the more that you can do for the people who want to use your services. Attractive to some funders, already mentioned that. In terms of partnerships, you can widen the scope now. You can widen the scope. The more skills, more experience that you've got, the more projects you can develop, more people you can reach out to. You can reach across geographical boundaries. You can reach across more racial and even more faith boundaries. There's all sorts of partnerships that can be developed out there. Increased capability to achieve larger grant funding in the future. Now, if you're a small church or charity or organization, right now you may be in the position where you can only apply for, say, small funding pots of, say, £10,000. By partnering up with a much larger organization, which then would give you the ability to apply for larger funding pots. When you finish that project with the larger organization, you've got that experience now, and you can use that now to, I guess, use that to catapult you to apply for bigger funding pots, to say, well, we've already applied and this amount of funding in the past, so that's why we are now we're experienced in that. We've shown the ability to deliver at that level. And spread your risks. Spread your risks. When it's all you, it's all on you. Sometimes it's nice not to have all of that pressure just on you to deliver. So spread the risks, pool the resources, because you can be doing something that is actually being detrimental to your church, to your charity, to your organization, because if things aren't working out with the project that you're doing, and you say that you're needing extra money, you're needing extra resources, extra time to be put into it, it's going to be taking that out of your church, out of your charity. Alleviating potential problems. Who is the leader? This I think is always can be a sticking point within partnerships. Who is the leader? I would say the leader should be the person who's best fitted, who's in the best position to lead. It may not necessarily always be the person who comes up with the idea. So that involves a lot of soul searching, a lot of looking inwardly at yourself as an organization, as a body, and to say what are you bringing to the table? What justifies that you should be the leader? And if it's only that, well, it was my idea, that to me is not a strong enough reason for you to be the leader. So it's very important, because if you've got the wrong person or the wrong organization leading a project, the chances of that project failing are increased. Do you need to adapt or change your vision or approach? Now, I'd always say there can be a bit of flexibility, but sometimes changing your vision or approach could actually affect whether service users want to or members want to access that project or service. It could actually impact on the outcomes and the impact that you want at the end of the project. You know, you can't always change everything to actually fit in with what the funding body requires. If you have to change it too much, then I would say that basically you're applying for the wrong funds. If you have to change to fit in with a partner, then too much, then maybe that's the wrong person or the wrong organization to be partnering up with. There must be some form of, there must be something that you've got in commonality that you've got, that you share. You must share that vision to have a decent partnership. If you don't, then at some point conflict could come into it, and then everything gets lost within conflict. How do you make decisions? That needs to be decided right at the beginning. Contracts, looking at how do you deliver the service? How do you decide if somebody's going to leave the service, or if a partner wants to end the partnership? How's it going to be? What happens to the resources afterwards? Oh, there's so many questions, and it's very important that you try and identify as many of those questions as possible prior, and get it down in a contract. I'm going to say a bit more about contracts in a second. Impact on service users, that's always got to be at the center of your decisions as well. You know, if you want to deliver a project that's going to be for a particular community, then really who you're partnering up with, you have to think about how will that impact on service users? So, for instance, if you was doing a project that was going to be for people who are affected by gambling, who are gambling addicts, you wouldn't necessarily create a contract, a partnership with William Hill. You know, it wouldn't make sense. So it's important that you understand the impact on service users. So important consideration when partnering. Having a formal partnership agreement or documents outlining the basic information of partnership businesses, the advantages are that they can help to avoid problems in the future. Even if you've got a good friendship with whoever the partnership is taking place, I would advise that you still have a contract in place, because there could be times where there's confusion, where you don't know what decision to make, where you're at a deadlock basically, and it ensures that people know what their rules are, what their duties are, and how to actually conduct themselves. So I would lean towards more having a formal type of contract in place, even more so. Oops, I've done something wrong here. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yep. If you're leaning towards a more formal agreement, remember this may not be as binding or as clearly defined. And you have to ask yourself the question, if you want an informal agreement, why? Because even though you may be classed as a charity, a community organization, even the church, it's still business. And they say there's no friends, there's no family in business, you know? So think about it. If it's explained clearly at the start, I think we should have an agreement is to protect both parties. Then anybody who doesn't want to have a formal agreement in place, I would actually question them and think, you know what? Maybe you're not the right person then if you're so against having a formal agreement in place. COVID-19 projects and services. This is just a very brief slide where I want to speak about GoodtoGive Back, very briefly. GoodtoGive Back, that's the charitable arm of GoodtoGive. And basically, during this time of crisis, we are developing, or we have already developed a number of proposed projects and services that will operate during this time of COVID-19, and also some of them post after COVID-19 has passed. So we will be looking for partners, because we will be applying for funding to deliver these projects. One of the examples of a project is Meals on Wheels one, which is very much for the most vulnerable and the most isolated members within the community. It's also about working in partnership across boundaries, so across boroughs. So churches covering different geographical areas and delivering Meals on Wheels. GoodtoGive Back aims to be the lead organisation, the lead charity in applying for these funds, basically because we've got the structure there in place already, and we've got the management system so that we can manage projects of this magnitude. We're also going to have other projects which will be very much digitally based, online projects, whether the advisory ones or type of counseling type of projects. And anybody that is interested can contact us through, excuse me, through the chat box that we've got here. So they can, if anybody's interested in becoming a partner, if you can contact, and I should have said at the start, Katrina Douglas, who has actually set up this webinar, and she is also, she's moderating, she'll be moderating any questions and so forth. So if you just record that on the chat box, then we can contact you after that. How to identify the right funder for you? Well, the first thing you need to know, what is this about? When you're applying for funding, are you looking at your priorities, or are you trying to just find some funding and so you'll fit in with any priorities of any funder? I think it's important that your priorities match up with that of the funder. So you need to look through their criteria for that, and ensure that you meet their criteria and their criteria actually fits in with the priorities that you're trying to achieve. Evidence, what evidence do they require from you? I think it's important that we look at what do they need? Do they need annual reports? Do they need accounts? Do they need to have all the details of your management committee or trustees or directors? Do they need bank statements? What do they need? Look into that. And a progressive organisation should have most of those at hand. If not, then I'd think about, as I said earlier, putting things in place from now. Look at the deadlines. What are the deadlines for the funders? Do these deadlines fit in with your timetable? If not, then they may not be the ones for you unless you're willing to change your timetable. And the funding period, how long is it for? Is it for a year? Is it for up to 3 years? Some of them you can even get 5 years. But in terms of you planning out your service, your project, you need to know what funding period it is. For instance, if it's 3 years, the first year might just be putting everything in place and developing everything, making sure that everything's going to start running smoothly. You may not actually start really delivering fully until the second year. And so you've got to work out the stages of your project. How to court funders. Quite simple, I'll just breeze through this one. Build a relationship with them. Call them, whoever you're applying for funding for, you call them, get a name, invite them to a team meeting or a special event. See if you can visit their base. Not now, obviously, but you know, road test ideas with them. You've got someone who you can phone. You can say, I was thinking about this, what do you think? And then get their thoughts on it. So it might be a no-goer from the start. So rather than you waste time, it's a good way of checking stuff out. Why use GoodtoGive? Well, first thing is, typically up to 80% of funding applications fail nationwide, whilst 80% of our applications are successful. Not saying that we're always successful, but you know, that's a really high turnaround. And so by getting that extra support and actually taking on board the advice and the guidance that we provide, it enhances your chances of success. Imagine that 80% of applications failing. So that that window, that success, the success rate is very low. Benefits, once again, by working alongside GoodtoGive, it provides greater freedom to explore ideas, because you're not totally, I guess, diverted away from what you should be developing, because you're just looking at funding. Increase capacity to make bids. You could possibly do multiple bids over a period of time. More time to invest in other areas within your organization. It's all about time again. The development of a funding process, which can be maintained for many years. We like to develop a relationship with our clients, so that we just become a trusted part of the process of actually accessing funding. One of the main questions that we're always asked is, well, how do we pay you? How are we going to pay you out of this funding? And I think it's important to look at it this way. We will try our best to build in the cost of our service into a funding application. You would say, firstly, how much funding you require, and then we will work out how much funding that then you should apply for. Reporting project oversight and funder responsibility via our service delivery monitor. We will help you to manage the whole project, the whole overview of the project, the delivery of the project. So if you've got reports that need to be submitted at certain times, that will be recorded within the SDM, service delivery monitor. It will flash up. You'll be reminded of that well in advance. Anything else like that will help to keep you on track so that you can deliver this project smoothly. You can achieve your targets on time, and therefore make you even more funding, more attractive to funders in the future, because that's what funders want to see. They want to see that you've delivered on time. They want to see that you've achieved your targets, and they want to see that, you know what, when funders have asked you for reports and for any information, that you've responded rapidly. And you know, it puts a mark against your name when a funder, especially at the end of the project, asks for a report, and 1 month later they're still asking for this report and asking for information. The quicker that you can fire off that information to them, the better. Key features of the funding service. We provide consultations. So consultations where those could be like this. They could be online. It could be video conferencing, call conferencing. In some cases, it can be physically, one-to-one, attending team meetings, those type of things. Funding research, we'll find you the best funders for your projects. Support to get funding ready. We can help, but realizing that sometimes support to get funding ready, that may actually be a separate cost that's not involved within the bid writing process. Completion of funding applications, that's a major one. Project scoping, looking at the scope of your project, looking how it can grow, how it can develop, how it can reach out further, those type of things. And management of the funding process. So basically that goes back to the service delivery model, and helping you to manage the funding process. So reporting, sharing information, reaching certain landmarks, deadlines, those type of things. These are other services here that GoodtoGive offers. Financial management for charities, so that's guide to financial accounting from our charity experts. We've got the charity fundraising, so that's what we've been talking about today, fundraising, grants and bid writing. We help your charity to prosper. That's around gift aid, accessing gift aid from our management experts, helping your charity to maximize its income through gift aid and from gift aid management experts again. And then GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. We will help to guide you through GDPR. Our compliance experts will ensure are compliant with the rules and regulations of GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. The GoodtoGive donation app, I just want to mention this. We've developed the GoodtoGive donation app, and it's a way for your members to subscribe to it, download the app, and to make donations to your church. And so this is a way that they can do it digitally, and it's quite an easy resource for them to access once they've subscribed to it and downloaded it. You're going to be able to access the link in our chat box, which Katrina is going to put there if she hasn't done so already. And hopefully it's something that will catch on. I'm pretty sure it will amongst your congregation and members. So what it will do, it will increase finances from within your organization. It will reduce administration, no more scanning envelopes for those who are using the app, increased member participation, better organization of church resources, and it will increase donations. So those are just just touching on some of the how it will help to increase finances within your organization. And now I am open to questions. So please speak up and I will try my best to respond.